Hey, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. It's great to see you here on a Wednesday. I am in for Alex today because Alex had previous commitments. So I'm Bill Davis. Probably most of you know me from being around here for a long time. We have a fascinating show today. As always, our first hour is going to be general tech questions and things like that. Our second hour today is going to be especially interesting for me. It's Tláloc Lopez-Watermann, and he's going to be talking about running shows remotely. That's something that this era, everybody seems to be interested in. How do we leverage the internet and the World Wide Web and things like Zoom, and how can you do it without everybody in the same room? Well, you're going to learn a lot about that today. So that's our second hour. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about run of show docs and techniques. That's the kind of run list that somebody runs a performance on, and a lot of issues about that. On Friday, that'll be fun. Friday is sticky issues. So this is, I'm going to read the little billboard thing that is in the description. This is the only place in the world that you will see a live 1-hour discussion of gaff tape, duct tape, and other stuff that sticks, Velcro included. So that's exciting. And speaking of exciting, tonight on Conversations with Tony Mobley, it's going to be one you don't want to miss. Our dear friend Daria Musk is going to be there from 8 p.m. with an hour discussion. If you don't know Daria, you really should, and you should come and watch the show. She's fabulous. She's been doing not only music performance, but has been a pioneer out in the world of broadcasting that, has TED Talks up there, and is just a fabulous person to listen to. So sneak on to Conversations with Tony Mobley tonight if you've got the chance. I think you'll really love it. So that's all the preamble. I guess we get to just dive into our Q&A system. So thank you all for being here. And I believe it's Courtney today who's going to be doing the announcer chores. Courtney, take it away.
Thank you, Bill. Coming up first is from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. He says, which autonomous facial tracking PTZ camera do you find to be the most accurate and reliable?
And it looks like Guy Cochran has a thought on that. So, Guy, take it away.
Yeah, you go all the way from the inexpensive, which is on these really like low-end PTZ cameras. So I would watch this unfold at CES over the years, how these chips, it's basically like an algorithm that they can buy for cheap and toss in these cameras. So that one doesn't work very well, like on the little huddle cams. If you get a $299 camera, don't expect it to work wonders. At the high end, there's the Mark Roberts motion control PolyChat. I'll put a link in the chat. Dennis could probably pop that graphic right now. That is super sophisticated. It's probably the best on the market, I would say. We also, in After Hours, played with the Panasonic, which I would say is the second best, and that one's pricey. That one's about $1,200, I believe, and then you have to install it on a PC with a GPU. And the way to make it really work is to actually add a secondary camera, which would be a wider camera. So when Mickey and I were playing with it, it would lose me. So I was walking around here, and it would, if I went too far out of frame and turned my head, it would lose track of my eyeballs in my head because that's, it's an AI algorithm looking for it. But it's super, it shows where the future is going. I mean, not having to put people on site and just having robots do it, it sounds scary, but it's actually pretty cool. And Jeff Keithley is doing a lot of this with his motion control cameras. It's pretty fascinating to watch it all unfold.
This is what is so exciting about Office Hours. Great answer. Hey, for the people who can't afford the top end stuff, what would you say is the lowest end, really useful solution
Facebook
guide?
Portal, like you'll see me every once in a while on Office Hour or After Hours pop in on a Facebook Portal, the bigger one. It does a pretty fantastic job, but that's just a 4K sensor that it's moving around in a 1080. It's actually not. So it's what they call an ePTZ. It's not physically moving the robotic, up, down, left, right of a physical platform. And actually, one more, Bird Dog just announced. So for a medium range, I'd say be looking at the Bird Dog as well. And the PolyChat stuff is agnostic. It's VSCA over IP, so it works with Sony, Panasonic, PTZ Optics. It works with all the major players. To control, and lumens as well, to control those cameras. But yeah, I'd also be looking at lumens as well. So there's two options, lumens as well as Bird Dog.
Excellent answer. Thank you very much. Oh, Jeffrey Powers wants to weigh in on this. Jeffrey, go ahead.
Yeah, when I was at CES, Canon came out with the AMLOS system, AMLOS, which was more than just facial tracking on the camera. It has the ability to, if you had like a whiteboard right here and you wanted to zoom in on something that you just wrote, it would zoom in on it. It would actually turn it, give the HDR treatment, and then bring it back on screen, so you could do like split screen and stuff like that. And the facial tracking, I was lots of great features with that. And this camera, I think, is under the $4,000 mark, if I remember correct. And yeah, $2,696 for the cameras. That it's great for a classroom, but once again, just as Guy said, if you walk off camera, it gets really confused because it doesn't see the faces anymore, and it has to reorientate.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Thank you. And I hope, Andy, that took care of your question. We're moving on to Douglas. Go ahead to the next question, Courtney.
Okay. Douglas Carmichael says, Unreal Engine 5 was released yesterday. How well does it work on Macs?
I always like this. So it's been out for some hours. Who is an expert on it already and knows everything about how it works? And has anybody had any experience with Unreal Engine 5? I mean, they've done good code. This is one of the most complex programs in the world, and some of us played with that for the Office Hours Space launch, and we got into Unreal and characters, and it's a pretty complex and pretty deep subject. So they're doing a lot of code wrangling behind the scenes, attempting to do a lot of very sophisticated stuff. We ran into occasional glitches and things like that, but I don't know whether it's all improvement in the 5th generation, and I don't think anybody's has any direct experience with it. We're just too new. Maybe come back in the next couple of weeks, and people will have been able to play around with it enough to get a solid opinion on whether this is a solid release or still has issues with it. Let's move on to the next question.
Okay, this one comes in from Adrian Albach in Brisbane, Olympic City. He says, what camera placement strategy can I use for 4 PTZ cameras to cover 6 people at an oval-shaped table?
And Jeffrey Powers is going to weigh in on this first.
4 cameras, that's awesome. I usually take one camera, put it right in the center of the table, and then do all the settings. So yeah, I just run on the Stream Deck, person 1, person 2, person 3, person 4. 4 cameras, I would treat it like like the oval table had corners, and then I'd put one camera on each corner, unless you need to have any other type of angle, like to see a whiteboard or something like that. If you do, then I would do a 3 triangle system around the table, and then one camera pointing it towards whatever whiteboard or anything like that. But yeah, with 4 cameras, that's 2 people per camera. So you could actually set it up so it would show 2-person. You could show, and then you could go to the singles from there. But don't get confused over which camera you're controlling, or else you run into a whole bunch of problems right there.
And I want to weigh in a little bit on this in terms of the fact that I think one part of it depends on the nature of the people around the table. If you have 6 equal people, you've got an issue. Are you going to put them on 2 sides of the oval? Are you going to use the ends and have 2 ends and then 4 people in the center? And the reason I bring it up is Alex has talked a lot about trying to get the geometry of camera shots right around a group discussion. On the Mac Final Cut shows that he did on the Final Cut, and I can't remember the name of them, but anyway, they spent a lot of time configuring tables so that each camera had a decent shot of 1 or more people. You get into a little bit of difficulty, like if you put 3 and 3, the question is, do you want crossing shots, and is somebody going to be a host? If so, you want a really solid picture of them so you can come back to that host before you go to the respondents and then come back to the host. If not, you may want everybody equally balanced because it's just a discussion. And so those things are going to determine whether or not your camera positions can get 1 person, 2 persons, or a side of the table at one time. So I think there are a few more things than just as simple as just put 4 equally balanced around the table and it will always work. You want to make sure you have good shots of everybody. And Jeffrey has another thought.
Yeah, and especially if you don't want people to see the cameras that you're using, you're going to really have to do some work to make them hidden. And if you want the straight on shot, then you have to worry about the person whose shoulder you're going over, because if they do like that, all of a sudden they're completely ruining the shot that you're using. So most likely you'll probably go above their heads pointing down, and that adds a different level of perspective in any of that, because you can't get that eye level look to it. So that's the big reason why I like putting the camera right in the middle of the table, because it just it's right there. I can get eye level easy, and you don't see the camera at all when I go back and forth. Unless you have an overall camera, then you're out of luck at that point.
There you go. Like most of productions, it seems easier when you're drawing it up. When you actually get into the field and start to do it, you have to be careful about these little things. Let's move on to the next question.
This is a related question from Adrian Albach, related to the previous one from Brisbane, Olympic City. He says, related to my other question, is there a motorized slider solution that can be programmed with a Stream Deck or integrated with camera presets using VI SCA over IP control?
And Jeffrey Powers is going to take it off.
I have yet to see one. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I haven't seen one on there. The best that I could think of that you could do controlling over a Stream Deck is if you were to, there's a couple programs out there that let you create infrared controllers, like a regular remote control. Like my slider is IR controlled. So then I would just program it through that IR, some sort of IR dongle or something like that can send out the remotes, and then I can go through Companion to do that. But other than that, everything else that's app controlled is pretty much closed infrastructure.
Yeah, I think some of the high-end sliders that I've seen have positional controls. And these are sliders generally in the, I'd say, 900 to up zone, where you can set up. And the great advantage of that is sometimes even a 5 or 6 inch move to get somebody's shoulder out of the way so you get a clearer shot of their face can be all you need. So it's probably a viable solution to think about sliders. The inexpensive ones, unless we have camera operators that are going to take care of moving them, would be more problematic. And if you're down to cameramen, I would think that a tripod mounted camera that has wheels under it would be as valuable, if not more so, if you can get the bodies in there. If you want to do it remotely, maybe there are some expensive sliders that do the work. Let's move on to the next question.
All right, Bill, this one comes in, it's kind of addressed to you from Nathan Cashin in Oregon City, Oregon. He says, visiting the Evergreen Air and Space Museum in Oregon, I heard a familiar voice. Did Bill Davis do the voiceover for this Space Shuttle Discovery simulation game produced by Binary Star Ltd.?
Well, thank you for thinking of me. No, I did not do that one. And I will tell you, it's interesting. There are many voice talents out there whose voices are very clear and understandable. In fact, there's been a trend in the last probably 10 years in voiceover in the community to have celebrities, because it brings some of the cachet of performances that you like from them or characters that they portray on TV. I have never been one of those kind of guys. I'm a generic voice type. I was born and raised and came up in Phoenix, which is an interesting city in terms of accents because there isn't one virtually. A lot of the people in Phoenix came from other places. So we tend to have a very middle of the road, not tied to a region kind of accent and thing that tends to work across things. But it also means that I get mistaken for other voice talents quite a lot. And I can only hope that they're better than I am and increase my reputation rather than making it more sketchy or sus. Mitchell Hill wants to weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, I agree with Bill. I think you're exactly right that a lot of people just sound alike once they get into announcer mode and they're reading copy. And just for the record, actually, that's me doing that, imitating Bill's voice.
Well, great job. And I would like my cut of the fee, please. Let's move over to Adrian. Oh, next question.
Okay, from Adrian, all back in Brisbane, Olympic City. He says, with Hans Zimmer live tour now underway, who is going to buy a merch T-shirt?
There's another question in here that I saw earlier. I guess this thing is going to be a monster of a thing. We'll talk about it more when we get to the second question. But is anybody really excited? You know, do we have any serious Hans Zimmer fanboys or fangirls here? He's done a lot of amazing work. That concert he did with Billie Eilish was just glorious for the James Bond theme when they broke it in the middle of the pandemic. But I guess we don't know, and nobody here is raising their hands for buying the merch, so I guess we're going to have to move on until we get to the next question about it.
Okay, from Jeff Vreeland in Indianapolis. He says, I'm a big fan of the LiFX Homekit compatible light bulbs. Are there other HomeKit compatible lights that do not require a bridge that you all like? Bonus points for color control as well.
Ooh, it doesn't look like we have anybody on the panel today who is using that particular aspect of HomeKit. I know that it's a pretty robust protocol, and I know that it can do a lot of this, but it's been kind of slow getting the linkage between the products in the marketplace, particularly in just your general Home Depot or something like that really talk to HomeKit well. Courtney has some thoughts on it, though.
Well, I don't know if it's HomeKit compatible or not, but most of these more popular ones that are Wi-Fi controlled that do not require a hub, like FEIT, they make a line of Wi-Fi controllable bulbs that are multicolor and have either a daylight white or a warm white LEDs as well as RGB LEDs inside of them. And I use some of them like that to create the colored lights behind me. They're all controllable over Wi-Fi with an app, and you can pick your color. And I believe this one said it is Mac and PC compatible, and they do support HomeKit, I believe.
Excellent. Jeffrey Powers.
So at CES, another thing that I saw was basically the Connectivity Standards Alliance, which is an alliance that's made up of everybody, of Google, of Amazon, and Apple are involved in this. And the idea is to have an all-in-one protocol. So it doesn't matter which personal assistant you have, it will cross over, and it doesn't matter what protocol you use, whether it just be the standard IP protocol or ZXE or anything like that. You'll be able to control however you do, which is really exciting because there's even the thought that you could actually program your own keyword to activate whatever your personal assistant is. So that's coming within the next year. And I'm not exactly sure how you can get in on that, but just look for the Connectivity Standards Alliance website, and they'll keep you informed on that. I'll put a link in the comment.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting big coming process, and we'll see more and more of this kind of remote control in the homes over the course of the years. Let's move on to the next question.
All right, coming in from London, England, Alex 40 Goldner says, Apple has announced that WWDC 2022 will be all online, and yet some developers and students will be invited to watch the two main keynote videos on a big screen as they go out. Anyone have any thoughts?
And at least two of our panelists do, Mitchell Hill and Jeffrey Powers. Then actually I'll jump in on this in the end, but go ahead, Mitchell.
Thanks, Bill. I think they're finally catching on, and having Tim Cook stand in a empty auditorium with lots of empty seats just isn't a good look for Apple, and there's no reason why they can't make it more of a virtual event. Plus, the nature of the event involves a lot more people than just Apple. A lot of developers, a lot of companies that are releasing things, so it just makes it an easier scenario for them to make it virtual and just bring them in as they need them.
Jeffrey Powers.
My understanding is that they're going to be watching screens just like the rest of us. They won't be in any auditorium because this is all going to be pre-done before that. But I could be wrong, but I think that they're bringing the students in simply for quality control, how they thought about how the event went and things like that, what they think about the products, and so on and so forth. I'm not exactly sure if they're bringing any reporters or any of the press in, or bloggers or anything like that. So we'll have to see how that goes, who gets the invites. And I know I'm probably not going to get an invite for that.
Well, too bad. I wish you could go. And I have no idea how it's going to run, but I know that, the millions upon millions they spent on Apple's new campus on the spaceship. And of course, the Steve Jobs Theater was one of the predominant pieces of that. They have fabulous technology. They have the ability to literally produce shows for the planet there. And unfortunately, COVID hit right after they started doing that. So we had like 2 or 3 of them. And then suddenly it's a facility in search of a use. Now that COVID seems to be more and more under control, fingers crossed for the planet, they are probably looking at, we've got this fabulous facility. It has all these capabilities. How can we leverage that and do something with it, even if it's not going to be the traditions of the WWDC as we remember them? I do think that their initiative to spread the word to developers is something that really is, what's the right word for it? It's leveraged by what Zoom and this kind of thing does well. They can reach so many more people by sending these modules out, producing them in advance, and doing a really good job of this for all sorts of constituencies all over the world in multiple languages simultaneously, that doing it in everybody comes here and listens to an English language presentation at one time is probably less effective than what they're going to be doing by producing, like they did last year, hundreds of modules, all on specific topics about the Mac ecosystem. So we'll see. Oh, Mitch wants to come back in on it. Mitch, go ahead.
I just got a mental image, a new Mac Pro. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, from your lips to God's ears, as they used to say. But there's so many people who want things. I will say the studio is making that a little bit of a tough call for me. I've known a couple of people who I thought bought more computer than they really needed back when the new kind of fancier cheese grater Mac Pros came out. They bought a lot of capacity, and my outside looking at them assessment was, do you really need that much power? Because you're not really doing that kind of work. I do think the studio fits incredibly well for a lot of content creators. I think it's a brilliant product in that respect, and we'll see as it develops a reputation out there. But let's move on to the next question.
All right, coming in from Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California. He says, can you change iPhone lenses when using zoom? Not just front to back, but the 0.5 or 3x lenses.
David Brady is going to start us out here.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. It doesn't have access to the optical lens, but if you're using the rear-facing camera and you solo your own view, you can pinch and zoom and widen that shot for zoom on mobile devices, but optically, no.
I think when I read this, I thought to myself, I wonder what they're trying to do, because obviously if you just HDMI your phone in, you've got pinch to zoom and all those things available. I think what they may be looking for is using that phone as the zoom device. And if you're trying to broadcast from your phone, natively, I don't think it does it. There are programs that do it, and I think I wrote a note here about one of them. Reincubate's Camo app, I think, might let you go down that path. It takes over the phone and allows it to be a webcam with a few more capabilities. So you might want to investigate that. I'm not absolutely sure it works, but I think there's a possibility there. Rupert McRae, go ahead, take a shot.
Yeah, I'd agree with them, David. If using the Zoom app, you can do the digital zoom if you kind of pin yourself and do the pinch thing there. But if you are going to do that, make sure it would be best if you're set to HD, because if you're not, you'll be trying to digitally zoom in a already low res feed. So try and get set to HD first, and then at least you'll have a bit more headroom to zoom in. Okay,
hopefully that gives you what you're looking for, Noah. Thanks. Let's move on to Douglas Carmichael.
All right, from Douglas, he says, I received my Roland FANTOM-06 keyboard yesterday and noticed, coming from an Arturia KeyStep Pro, that the full-size keys have more mechanical noise than the KeyStep. Is this normal with the full-size keybeds?
And we're going to start with Mitchell Hill and go to Jeffrey Powers. Mitchell.
Don't know specifically about that one, but some Velocity keyboards tend to be a little noisier because they've got more stuff going on inside them.
Jeffrey?
If you have a weighted keyboard will act differently than a plastic keyboard and the lift. So it's really dependent on whether the keyboard wants to feel more like a piano or just wants to be a synthesizer from there. So yeah, there's going to be a little bit more mechanical that's going inside the keys, but for the feel and the weight, so that's probably what you're feeling when that's pressing down.
And Courtney.
Yeah, Jeffrey kind of covered it there. They try and, the more high-end keyboards try and emulate the feel of a real piano, which has a really complex, striking mechanical connection to the hammer. So it'll hit a lever, which will move a little weight, which will simulate the change of velocity as you hit the key, and it'll feel like you're actually moving something through space rather than just pressing down a key and closing a switch. So they try and emulate that of the real mechanism on a true piano.
Yeah, I do recognize that there are a lot of different kinds of keyboard players, some of whom touch is a very highly prized idea. Serious concert pianists, the nuances that they're able to extract out of music because of that feel and touch, from very quiet sounds to very loud sounds and the rest. They want every bit of tactile feedback they can get. Others, like me, pound around, doesn't make a darn bit of difference how much tactile feedback I still can't play. And I just noticed that in my own typing. You get used to one keyboard, and then whenever I move to a different keyboard, even in typing, if the geometry is just a little bit off, if it's this size keyboard versus that size keyboard, I will have difficulties. I would imagine that for good musicians, that's every bit as important for them. So there's just some thoughts on it. Let's move on, Paul.
Okay, Paul. This is from
To
Paul.
I'm so used to doing this as the. Never mind. Courtney, take it away.
I know the problem. From Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, he says, Meeting Owl Pro is an all-in-one 360-degree camera, mic, and speaker for collaborative hybrid teams. Has anyone heard of it, tried it, read reviews about it?
Yeah, we're going to start with David Brady. David, take it away.
Yeah, not the Pro version. Pre-pandemic, we looked at their entry level when they first hit the market, and it was kind of gimmicky, meant for smaller huddle room type spaces and not really quite there for enterprise, from my opinion.
Okay, Jeffrey Powers has an opinion as well.
Yeah, once again, I keep saying CES in this episode. So at CES, I got to see the Owl Pro. Also, J5 makes a very similar type situation. What I like about the Owl Pro is that they bring it up a little bit higher off the desktop, so that the edges get that eye level look to it, and then of course they're using software to key and make everything look pretty when you want to set it up to look at one person. But I wouldn't use it in any type of production. I'd use it for meetings. That'd be fine. The speakerphone, that's a different story. We all know what conference rooms sound like without a speakerphone involved, and then you put that right in the middle of the table. It's going to be what it is.
Next question, Courtney.
All right, from Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. He says, Wired and others have put out reviews of password managers, and Lastpass seems to be taking a bit of a hit. 1Password is now the darling of reviewers. Is it time to migrate from Lastpass to 1Password?
And David Brady has an opinion on this.
Come on over to OnePass. I've been using it for years. I convinced my team at work to get a enterprise thing, so now we can share certain subsets of passwords amongst users, etc. Pretty solid, and I've been happy with it.
David, is that sharing password thing the key feature that makes you like it over that, or are there other things comparing the two that you've found pulled you?
I think just the integration across platforms with OnePass is really solid. There's a browser plugin, so all I have to do is remember my one simple password, plug that in, and it does its thing. The sharing, though, is a definite win for the small team that I'm with, where there's a certain amount of passwords we need to share amongst us. So, yeah. Okay,
fair enough. Looks like we're moving on. Courtney?
All righty. From Douglas Carmichael again, another Zimmer question. Hans Zimmer live tour, and he has a link there, is touring with a 19-piece band, Hans himself, and a 300-piece orchestra. With that many musicians, how do you keep them from clashing with each other, both musically and in the live mix?
I just want to know how they manage bathroom breaks. 300-piece orchestra, 19-piece band. Oh, my gosh, that's gigantic. Jeffrey Powers is going to weigh in.
And then you have to add in the COVID protocols, and because I'm assuming that they're going to be separated, sections are going to be separated by partitions and things like that, so everybody stays as safe as possible for a situation like that. So it's not going to be easy, and there's going to probably be many things that we're finding out in the next year that they'll be learning how to do, so they can keep everybody safe and as close together as possible.
Wonder how much the tickets are going to cost. I mean, just the number of buses alone they're going to have to manage on every stop of a tour. It's going to be astonishing. David Brady has some thoughts.
Yeah, how to keep them from clashing would be practice, practice, practice. That's the same way to get to Carnegie Hall, too.
Courtney's up next. Courtney.
Yeah, and it's called arranging, because they have musical arrangements where the band has a lead for a while, and then the orchestra supplements them in the background, and then the orchestra can take a lead, and the band takes a hiatus. So it's just through careful arrangements and orchestrations, and like you said, rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. And of course, miking them, dealing with them in the mix is another problem when you're miking a 300-piece orchestra. I kind of doubt they've got each piece in that orchestra mic'd, but sections are mic'd, and then probably the band is all mic'd individually as well as Hans. So a lot of rehearsals.
I think with the career that man has had, he will, if anybody can pull this off and create a magnificent presentation, it should be him. He's such a fabulous arranger and composer that it'd be a nice ticket to grab a hold of. I don't imagine it'll be cheap, but hopefully some folks who can hear me right now will be lucky enough to do that. Let's move on to the next question.
Coming in from Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas, who says, what's a great inverter and a great battery to power it? So you could run a server, a router, and a cable modem for several days or more in a power outage.
And Mitchell Hill's going to take us off on this one.
Yeah, I've got an APC 30 amp behind me, but it's only good for about 20 minutes on my system, which is typical of most UPS battery backup systems. I suppose you could go to a Tesla Powerwall, and depending on what kind of configuration you get something that could handle that, but that's an expensive proposition.
It's too bad Jeff Keithley isn't here, because in the office hours rocketry demo, we had a Tesla out there, and it was powering part of the infrastructure. We also ended up having to have generators and things like that. So I think 24-hour or a long production. It's a router and a cable modem, so that isn't a whole lot of draw. So maybe some of those big ones. Let's go to Guy Cochran and Rupert McRae want to dive in. So let's get to Guy first.
Yeah, 5 minutes to the show, the power went out in my neighborhood, so I fell prey to 2 battery backups kicking in. One of them, I forgot that I plugged in my Aperture big P300 light, which is mammoth, and sucked the power right out of that thing. I didn't even realize the power had gone out, and I was sitting here for a few minutes, and then that light went out, and everything else stayed on, but that light just sucked down the juice out of that small one. So you got to read the amperage of the devices that you're plugging in, and then you can do the math from there as to how long you want it to go up. So my CyberPower is a rack mount unit. It's about $600, and it's got some 2 big beefy batteries in it. My little ones, they're like 189 or something like that. They're just meant, like Mitch was saying, little APCs for like a couple minutes of use to safely shut down and save and all that. But the other ones, if you want to have things go for hours, we have 3 of these CyberPowers in our rack at work, and we've taken a few power hits over the years, and all of them we just cruised right through. And then we have a generator backup ready to go. So we have a full-on protocol. Power goes out, they're stringing wires to the server room, and they're getting everything prepped and gas ready or diesel ready. And so there's a process, but make sure, test. I mean, pull the power and actually run it dry, see what happens, see the load. And the good ones will have a readout on the front to show you what the load is. It'll show you how much is left and all that. So just depends on how much you want to spend, because some of these can get pretty pricey.
Rupert McRae's next. Rupert?
Since Paul's asking about an inverter and a battery, separately, I think he's thinking beyond a UPS, more like a standalone power supply set up for some isolated equipment, much like somebody might have on an RV or something like that. That's how I'm visualizing the question. Even in that scenario, it's important to bear in mind that you'll need a separate charge controller if you're going to want to charge that battery up, in situ when there is power available, shore power or whatever. So you can get some combined units that'll do that. A charge controller, inverter, everything built in. The key part of the question, though, is the server. Really, what is that server? I mean, is it a big old rack mount, 600 watt deal, or is it something that could be miniaturized? Maybe is it a server roll that could be put onto a smaller computer that could be DC powered? If you can do that, it sounds like you're dealing with all DC devices there. You could do the whole thing off a DC battery bank and not need the inverter part if that suited the use case.
Courtney Gooden.
Yeah, it is a good idea to run them on DC if you can. If you can't, just get you an inverter that's rated for around 500 watts or 300 watts continuous. Usually the 500 rated ones are 300 continuous. And then if you have like a CyberPower or APC, one of the generalized UPS backups that have replaceable batteries, you can go into the battery compartment and attach some hefty cables to those cables that go into it, and hook up a couple of deep discharge marine batteries that you use in boats that are 12 volts lead acids, and keep them on a trickle charge 24/7 so that when it goes out, you can have a couple of days worth of power off those a couple of 75 amp batteries in parallel, 2 or 3 maybe, and that should keep you through the apocalypse.
Jeffrey Powers wants to weigh in on this.
Yes, the server is, of course, the server is going to draw the most power, as Rupert said. The cable modem, I actually have a smaller battery that my cable modem and my router switches are pretty much on. So if I was to lose power right now, at least my network will stay up for getting emergencies and stuff like that. As opposed to doing it for days, the best thing to do is plan a schedule, because you're not going to be 24/7. You're going to have to shut down some systems for a little bit to conserve some of your power and give your batteries a chance to reload up. So make sure that you got a good plan going there, and you should be able to go through multiple days.
Absolutely. And Rupert McRae wants to get back in on this before it's over.
Just to tie it up, if you're going to put it together as a system and get a separate inverter, make sure you, particularly for electronics, get a pure sine wave inverter. None of this square wave rectified nonsense.
Fair enough. And this is one of those days Alex occasionally mentions where the panel is just crushing it, kicking through a lot of questions. So if you have any, this is a great day to add questions later in the day here, particularly on our first hour topics. I think we have some for both, but it's a nice time to get your answers. So let's move on to the next question, Courtney.
Coming in from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, PA, says one Zoom waiting room setting is users invited during the meeting by the host or co-host will bypass the waiting room. I'm assuming links generated from the participant button can be forwarded to expedite entrance into a meeting. Any caveats?
I know as little as anybody on this panel about the back end of the system, so I would not be the person to answer this. Does anybody here in the panel? I mean, it's almost the time we want some of our back end geniuses to pop up and help you, but I don't know the answer to this one. Jeffrey Powers is here for it. Jeffrey, take it away.
Well, the biggest thing is when you're a host or a panelist and you're coming on a show, having that instant pass through is always a good thing. Not sitting there waiting for things like that. Being able to get your sound checks and your framing all set up before that. The only issue I could see is if one of the panelists decides to share their Zoom link with somebody else, and then all of a sudden they're trying to come in on the same account. As we've seen here, and that could be somewhat of a problem. Other than that, we haven't seen that in action just yet.
That happened to me in the early days of office hours. I posted my link somewhere wrong, and I had a rogue Bill Davis in for a couple of days. It all settled itself out. I will say, without giving away anything about the back end, all of us come in the mornings, and then there's a few things we do to get ready, and there's a little checklist we have to go through. So I don't know about maybe a guest coming in directly who doesn't need to understand the entire back end protocol. But for those of us who are here regularly, there are a few things that we have to do to make sure that we are well suited before we get onto the piano. So I'll just leave it at that, and we'll move on to the next question.
This one comes in from Fleety in Bali, Indonesia. He says, are there any recommended resources for learning Bitfocus Companion for the logically lacking?
I resemble that remark,
but
I do not.
For Dummies book, maybe.
Jeffrey Powers will help us, and then David Brady will help us even more.
Well, Well, first and foremost, YouTube. There's a lot of people that are using Bitfocus Companion way past what they ever thought they were going to use it for. Like I have two Stream Decks on my desk right now, where I can switch back and forth between Companion and go from there. There's the virtual aspect of Companion and all that other good stuff. But they have a Facebook group that's very active. They have a Discord group that's also very active, and they're ready to answer questions. I know there's an unofficial Reddit group that will help you with everything. But once again, YouTube's probably going to be your best place to learn how to use it.
Fair enough. David Brady is next.
And one more resource to that long list that Jeffrey just provided is the After Hours crew. There's a lot of folks there that use it and know it, and we'll be more than happy to sit down and try to help as best we can.
We should amplify that. For those of you who might be new to office hours, there is a robust, and I don't say that lightly, robust community who gathers after the show and goes in all the hours that the official office hours broadcast isn't on the air. And their entire reason for existing is pretty much just to help people and answer questions and do the same kind of thing, but more one-on-one. And they can take much more time to help somebody diagnose issues and hopefully solve them than we have time to do on the general show. But great resource. So if you haven't stopped by After Hours, you should do that. Guy Cochran has a thought or two before we finish.
Yeah, a couple places. One was the Liminal. Before they got acquired by Zoom, they had some really good tutorials that Andy Carluccio had put up for Zoom ISO. And then another one that really shocked me was the stagetimer.io in the help FAQ guide. Man, that guy, he shows some stuff. I had never played with the API where I was firing off buttons to reset timers and things like that for the stage that I didn't know that I could do that simply. So I'll put a link in the Mukana chat, but it's pretty awesome.
Sounds like an excellent resource guy. Thank you. All right, moving on. Next question. Whoops, Courtney, you're muted, it appears.
Sorry. This one comes in from Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. He says, Jeffrey Powers reviews a ton of stuff for Amazon, etc. on his podcast. What product is he most jazzed about in the past year?
Ooh, putting Jeffrey on the spot. Jeffrey, take it away. What's caught your attention?
Well, there's a lot of different things. You know, the one thing about Amazon is it seems to be the big disruptor when it comes to a lot of hardware. So you find this $1,500 piece of equipment, and then all of a sudden you start seeing a $700 piece of equipment that has a different brand name on it. I found that some of the camera gear, which is very exciting, some of the camera gear they basically go through licensing. And so when a manufacturer creates something like a PTZ camera, they have a little contract that says that they cannot sell it to anybody else to distribute out for a couple of years. But once that contract starts to come up, all of a sudden the whole thing floods out. And that's what we're seeing right now with PTZ cameras, is the $1,600 PTZ camera you can get for $500-$600. Now, this will also include software that's programmed by the manufacturer that's selling it, or the company that's selling it. So you won't have things like NDI, or you might have some different looks to it. But there might also be some there was a camera that we had earlier that was made by a different company, looked exactly like the one camera that was like twice the price, and I put the firmware on that camera from the other company, and it worked perfect, and it's working exactly like that other camera. So you can take a little risk on that, and but of course with Amazon, the best part about that is a lot of these have return policies. You got to watch the return policy, because there are some that say no returns. So if you buy it, it's yours. So if you have a good return policy, give it a try, test it out, and if you don't like it, send it back.
Jeffrey, you've been doing this for so long. Is there a product that really just surprised the heck out of you, that you either had a low expectation of and it performed really well, or you had a really high expectation of, or just something that you went, I didn't expect this coming?
I've had some products that come across my desk, microphone, mostly the microphone market. That's the big one. These USB microphones, they are sometimes hit or miss. There was a control board that I thought was going to be really exciting, especially because Clubhouse had that whole, you can't use a digital microphone in there, but it was a cheap piece of plastic that you could still buy, but it's not great. And there's like knockoffs of that also are the same. They work if you're getting in on that, but eventually you get kind of frustrated with how it works, and then you move on to something else. So things like that, the microphones. Let's see. Oh, but on the other end of the spectrum, the one thing that I use on a very regular basis, it's the Works Zip Snip tool, and I don't have it close by, but basically it's a little cutting tool. If you need to cut cardboard to recycle, if you have packaging like I showed the Magic Jack yesterday, which had that plastic packaging. You usually try to get a scissors through there. It's
right. Getting into those adult-proof packaging things, they're insane sometimes.
The Zip Snip by Works is the one that I would highly recommend. I'll put a link into Mukana, but it's a great tool to have if you need to cut anything small, like a cardboard or fabric or anything like that.
Excellent. Thanks. Let's move on to the next question.
This one comes from Chad LaForge in Columbia, Missouri. He says, for all panelists, what piece of gear or technique has saved your bacon more times than any other?
Okay, we've got 3 people in, and I'm going to reserve. Nobody else can say gaff tape because I'm going to do it later. Mitchell Hill first.
I like bacon, and I like gaff tape, so those are 2 good things there. But anyhow, my Stream Deck, that was just I didn't expect it. I bought it because it had lots of blinky lights on it and buttons, and since then, it's found its way into my heart in so many different ways. One of them is the Mix Pro. It's Adam Tao's wonderful product that allows me to control the ATEM. That combined with the Stream Deck is a wonderful combination that does everything, including bacon.
Courtney Gooden.
Velcro, yes. I saved my bacon. Oops, I just dropped what I was going to show you. One of these
Was that thing Velcroed up? Just tell the truth.
I should have had it on Velcro, and then it wouldn't have fallen. One thing is these stick PCs. I carry a couple of these in my laptop case, and they have saved my bacon on a number of occasions because it's a full Windows PC with HDMI out, and so if you need a little server to generate something, or you need to put up a display on a screen in the background, it can do video playback. You can connect to it over Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. It's a full computer, and you can carry a couple of them in your laptop bag along with you so that you're not tying up your laptop to do something that somebody else forgot to bring a PC for.
Perfect. Guy Cochran.
I'll go with two things. One isn't a thing, really. It's just a checklist. So my checklist says present, checked, and then double checked. And that, I can't believe how many times like one little thing got taken out of my bag or my kit before I went on a shoot or flew out somewhere. And then I just went through my checklist and it was like ping. And without that, it would have been a showstopper. It would have caused me to, have to run to some other rental house or something at the last minute. So those little widgets, timecode cables, and these little things that just get pulled out. So that, and then the Decimator MDHX with its ability to do HDMI to SDI conversion. Sometimes we've had where we needed it to act as a DA, where we would send in one SDI, needed two. The other thing is to check the signal. So on the screen on the front, it will tell you, is this 1080i, 1080p, 1080p 24, 2398, what are we getting? So it's just a good way to know that you're getting signal. So MDHX would be the win.
I'm going to go +1 on your checklist idea. That there's a guy named Atul Gawande who is a Harvard Medical School valedictorian who wrote a thing about how checklists can change the world in surgery for surgeons. And as soon as I read that, I just doubled down on all checklists. I think it's one of the greatest tools you can master. David Brady has more thoughts.
Yeah, belt and suspenders, meaning a backup plan for everything is one. And I'm waiting on Decimator to start shipping, but here at work we use the Barco Screen Pros, and those scalers will save you bacon every time.
Tom Ferguson's next.
Well, I would say it's my cellular iPad Pro because it goes everywhere I need to go, and it generally has answers.
There you go, Jeffrey Powers.
So I built, as you might have seen on my Facebook, I built a system for taking it out for different events around the town. And that included a Mac Mini and an Intel NUC, and that kind of saved my bacon. The Decimator is another part of that, but I have instead of having a laptop, which I stopped technically using laptops for video production a couple of years ago, I have an actual portable monitor. It's a ViewSonic TD1655, which is a touchscreen. Unfortunately, Mac can't work with the touchscreen, but the PC side can use it just like a touchscreen, which is great. But what I ended up having to do, because what we did was we did video production, and part of it was to take the video down to a secondary room so people could go to the other bar and then just kind of watch the music, and then it added a more respectable volume so they could talk, they could watch the basketball games and things like that. It was a lot of fun. We had a small little problem getting through because they have this little Ethernet, HDMI to Ethernet system that wasn't getting through even with the Decimator. So I ended up having to disconnect that, take the NUC out of my system, and then take that downstairs and then use something like, I used NDI to send the signal down there to those projectors, and it worked perfect. So that really saved the bacon for the
Courtney
night.
Excuse me.
Yeah,
go ahead.
That's biggest thing is if they have gear there, have your own version of that gear because it might not work.
Fair enough. Courtney wants to pop back in before we finish up.
One thing I forgot to mention, too, is with the little stick PC, is these little chargers that are designed for charging your cell phone, and with a short cable, it'll actually power the stick PCs on 5 volts, or any piece of accessory equipment that you have that will run on a USB, a micro input or a mini input. You can use these to power. I think this will power this PC for about 3 or 4 hours. So it's great in an emergency backup if you're out in the field and you don't have access to power.
Perfect. And I mentioned, I'm not going to wax on about it, but gaff tape has saved my bacon more times than I can tell you in the field. For those of you who might not understand it, there may be a couple of you that we haven't proselytized this enough. It is not the same as duct tape. It is not the same as any other kind of tape. Good gaffer's tape has an amazing ability to stick tight, peel off cleanly, not leave residue behind, and it is so robust in its fabric backing that you can literally take a couple of wraps around to put even a heavy light up if you must do it accidentally. It is a genius invention. Whoever invented it should be given a Nobel Prize, in my opinion. Anyway, moving on. Next question.
Coming in from Clive Kitchener in Souk, British Columbia, in Canada. It says Lumix GX7 in video mode automatically zooms in. What setting do I change to stop that?
Do we have any Panasonic Lumix folks here? I know the people who love those cameras absolutely love them. They have a big constituency. I have never used them personally, so I'm afraid you may get a unforced error here from the panel in terms of. Oh, Courtney has a thought. Courtney, take it away.
I don't have a GX7, but what I'm thinking what it does is, since it's a full-scale sensor, and if it's outputting video over HDMI or video output, it's going to switch resolutions in order to do that. So it will take a smaller section of the sensor and output that over the HDMI. So that's why it appears to be zoomed in, because the image that you see through the viewfinder will be the full frame of that sensor, and the output will be cropped and zoomed in because it's taking just a portion of that high-resolution sensor to output it at 1080p.
That sounds quite accurate in my experience. I've seen other things that take a big sensor, DSLRs particularly, and it's not dumbing them down for video, but they only need 1920 by 1080, not 86 gazillion pixels. So they just take a center punch out of that and do it. So that sounds reasonable to me. Let's move on to the next question.
Coming in from Abby Lopez in San Antonio, Texas. He says, Albie Lopez, my mistake. What UPS would you all recommend for home use?
So it's uninterruptible power supplies time. Mitchell Hill's going to start us off.
I'm a fan for APC. I've been using them for years and years and years, and they're reliable, easy to get a new battery into them. They're available for old ones and new ones alike.
Jeffrey Powers.
Yeah, APC is a great one. I've actually got the Amazon Basics one down in my basement. I bought about 4 years ago, and yeah, definitely get one with that you can replace the battery, and plan to replace that every 2 to 3 years.
And Rupert McRae.
Yeah, again on APC, I think I've always used APC, and I've certainly had no reason to go elsewhere. Beyond a brand, though, in terms of specifics, it will all depend on how much load you're wanting to carry and how long you want to carry it for, and what level of integration you want in terms of like automatically shutting things down and like things like that. But APC will have that all covered for you within their ranges.
I'm sensing a trend here. Courtney, you going against the grain or piling on?
I like APC, but CyberPower is another one that's very similar to the APCs. And I've noticed if you've had an old one, go out and shop a new one, because they've changed drastically in the last couple of years, because they've gone to digital switching power supplies and inverters. And they're much lighter. They don't have those huge transformers in them anymore. And they used to have a big lead acid, like a 6 or a 7 amp lead acid battery, and some of them have actually gone to lithium-ion batteries inside, which can make them much lighter. Or they'll go to a lead acid, sealed lead acid battery that is about half the size of what they used to previously put in. But due to the increase in efficiency of the inverter, they get the same life out of it as the old ones that had the big transformers and the bigger batteries.
Fair enough. Let's move on. Next question.
From Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, PA, says, what is the method of adopting a phone as a Zoom room controller? I'm aware that some pairing techniques that work with tablets do not work with phones.
And David Brady is going to start us off here.
Yeah, my experience with phones and Zoom rooms is it's not meant to be a permanent controller. So that being said, there's two ways you can go about it. The standalone controller app needs to be signed into your tenant. And then as you approach a room, provided the ultrasonic thing is enabled, it'll see that room and you can pair it that way temporarily. The other one is the Zoom app on the phone. If it's up to date and the same conditions exist, as you get in proximity to the room, you'll see a little icon in the upper left corner to say control Zoom room or join from room, and it gives you all the controls. As soon as you walk out of the proximity, all those features disappear and you're back on your own.
Okay, fair enough. Next question.
This one comes in from Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. He says, when Amazon's team of experts labels a product as best based on star ratings and customer ratings, are they usually right?
Ooh, this is going to be complex. Courtney?
Well, usually. They do now have measures in place to try and trap a lot of the manufacturers and so on that tend to game the systems and all these ratings. They would hire people in another country to, file reports, but these days, of course, they have verified purchasers. So Amazon knows if you're reviewing a product or turning in a review on a product, whether you've actually purchased and received that product. So that adds a lot of weight to their rating system, because you won't get people to file 30 wonderful 5-star rating if it's a piece of crummy equipment, let's just say. And I find that the anything that they use and turn into an Amazon Basics brand, they will take a third-party product and sell it as an Amazon Basic. And usually they test all that stuff fairly carefully, and before they'll sell it as Amazon Basic, they'll have to have a lot of good reviews of it, and they'll actually review it and test it in-house before they put their label on it.
Jeffrey, very quickly, we're starting now. I just looked down the list. We've got a lot of questions here suddenly.
It's called PayPal reviews, and yeah, they definitely ban that. And so if you get anything like that, you definitely let people know. But and I forgot the other thing I was going to say, so I'll just leave it at that.
That's okay. Best is always hard, You got cars. Is a Mercedes best or is a Maserati best? Total different markets. Hard to say which is which. It just gets into the weeds. Let's keep moving on. We've got a bunch of questions to get through quickly.
From Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana, he says, I got a last-minute call to speak at a meeting. I ended up presenting from one iPad and broadcasting the meeting from a second with a road go over my Starlink running from my truck. Are there any good tips for one-man shows like that?
Well, congratulations. I'm assuming you got it done. And if you got it done, then that's a feather in your cap. I think just when you're putting together something to do a one-time shot and it works fine there, you probably ran into some things you weren't completely happy with, and you can probably make it better for the next time. But, congratulations. That's what I'm going to say. There, you will learn refinements. And if you ask places like here, you'll get refinements. But you got it done. Bravo, you. Let's move on to the next question.
Coming in from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, PA, says, has anyone successfully deployed a Zoom room in a virtual machine? Is there any documentation? And how could the challenges of display and audio be satisfied for an NDI workflow over a local network?
This one's pretty technical, and I am not technical in these areas, so I don't see any hands raised. This may be one of those that you might want to come back when we have a different constituents of panel. One of the great pluses of office hours is you're going to get a range of professionals with opinions here. Another day you'll come back, there will be different professionals. They will have different areas of expertise and maybe a better answer for a question like this. It looks like since nobody's raising their hands, we're not going to be in on this one. So let's just move to the next one. Sorry, Josh.
Well, he's got another question. Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh says, what are good uses for old phones and tablets?
Tom Ferguson and David Brady are going to weigh in on this. Tom?
Well, after many years, I finally convinced my wife to let me digitize all of her recipes. So we put our third iPad, or the oldest, in the kitchen. And while it needs a thorough cleaning every once in a while, it's a good use for it. And she can bring up those recipes at any time. For iPhones, it could be a spare remote control for that lost Apple TV remote or other home control devices.
Great. David Brady?
Yeah, I use a couple of old iPod Touches with VLC just for doing looping videos. And then for older stuff, too, you can find out how things work by taking them apart. It comes in handy.
Courtney?
And if you have an old phone and you have a Magic Jack for your wired telephone, you can get the Magic Jack app and run on it, and even though it's not connected to the cellular network with your old phone, you can talk over Wi-Fi with it, as long as it's signed into your Wi-Fi network. So you can use it as a remote handset with a real phone number, which you can answer that phone, even though it's not connected to the cellular network with that app and using your own local Wi-Fi. Or you can also stick it under a table that has one leg that's a little too short. It'll keep it from wobbling.
And the next final question from Douglas Carmichael.
All right.
Courtly?
Douglas Carmichael says, has anyone used the music learning app Melodics? And he has a link there. I've heard good things about it, but I've also heard that Yousician, and a link to that, can be a bit more comprehensive. So 2 music apps.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we didn't get any hands raised on this. So it looks like this group of people do not have specific information about those 2 programs. So that's going to be another circumstance where it's probably a good idea to reach back. It used to be that Tuesdays was often more audio and music related. We've drifted a little bit away from that. But people do form habits. So you might want to drop back a week from yesterday and see if there are more music-oriented people who can help you with that. And if not, it's been brought up as a topic here. So hopefully people will know a little more about it the next time you ask that question. So all that said, I think we're very close to the top of the hour here, which means that I'm going to wait, just pause for a second, see if there's a dip to black. And if there is, we will start into our second hour. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the second hour of Office Hours. We're going to be talking to somebody who's been around Office Hours for a while now and has a great amount of skill in one of the most, I think, fascinating and interesting areas that we talk about, and that is remote control of performance and shows. Please welcome to the panel here, Tláloc Lopez-Watermann. Tláloc, it's good to see you. How are things going?
Nice to see you, Bill, and everybody. It's great to be here.
Could you describe a little bit? I am just fascinated with what you're doing here. The idea that somebody's sitting in their home, possibly thousands of miles away, fully running a remote production in terms of stagecraft lighting and things like that, just boggles my mind. And you have become one of our lead thought leaders here about that. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into it and why?
Yeah, so, I'm a lighting designer, a theatrical lighting designer. And so, as you all know, the pandemic was a little rough on my industry because we gathered people in a room and we all of a sudden couldn't do that. So we were figuring out from day one how to decentralize production for these kinds of theatrical events. And as that went through, there were all kinds of different ways in which we needed to make that happen. Maybe we had a bunch of contributors, acting contributors from different places or different homes, all separated out for social distancing, for the pandemic. And we were needing to try to control the lighting in each one of those people's homes centrally, right? So that we could make a comprehensive show. And so one of the first things that I encountered for that was Andy Carluccio's Liminal and Streamweaver. And that was the way in which we could send ArtNet across the wider access network, the WAN, and essentially control lights in people's homes. And there are, it's difficult, and particularly difficult when you have large IT networks and trying to get that all to work. And, we've been working on this now I can say it. We've been working on it for years. And
hey, wait a second. In that, I want you to give people a little bit of your background, because I looked up your CV, and you have a very deep theatrical background in lighting and technology. Can you give us a little history about where you came from and why you understood this well enough to make some of these tools?
Yeah, so I've been doing lighting design for theater and opera and concerts and dance for 20 years. Let's see if I think the math's right. But I fell in love with it. I fell in love with it early. I fell in love with it in high school, and I just went for it, and I went to Cornish College of the Arts for undergrad and to NYU for grad school, all for lighting design. And so I've been trying, succeeding at making a career of this since then.
The thing I loved most about looking at some of your work online, though, is that this is things like opera, where lighting is such an integral part of the drama. I mean, without a great light plot and without it enhancing the artistic effort of this, it just becomes like a stage play that doesn't have that level. How is it that you managed to what were the tools, what tools were missing, and what do we have now that we didn't have back then that allowed you to feel great about working in this area?
Well, as we've moved forward, over time, we've gained a lot of great technology. We have moving lights, we have LEDs, we have color changeable. We used to have to go and filter every single light because we would have a single color. We would choose filters, and now with the advent of LEDs and of moving lights, we can make these choices and change these colors and change these looks through a computer or through a lighting console. And so then and I know I got to get to the point here, guys, so I'm sorry, but when the pandemic happened, we had to figure this out. We centralized it with Streamweaver, so that meant that there was a lighting controller at one location, and it was sending out ArtNet to all these other locations. But when we have a theater, for example, where we want to decentralize, we want to have the lighting designer be somewhere else. What we found is that it is actually easier to have that lighting controller be at the location. So we don't have to send all this DMX chatter across the internet, because in fact, it's quite chatty. It's constantly sending essentially a frame, kind of like video. It's sending a frame of where all those lights are over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so it turns out it's easier to remote desktop into a lighting control and work from it there. And I'm hoping that this show is seen by somebody at ETC and they realize that people are doing this, because they could make it a little easier for us to do these remote contributions.
So do I understand this? Basically, you're not controlling the light, you're controlling the device that controls the light.
Yeah.
And the device is local. Yeah.
The device is local. I sent, the way that ETC works is they have, multi-$1,000 consoles. But you can't do remote desktop in those multi-$1,000 consoles. But they also have a thing called Nomad, and Nomad is essentially the ability to make any PC, Mac into a lighting console. And so with a license key, that opens that up, and then you can remote desktop into that desktop or that laptop, and you can control it. You can control it from anywhere. There are things, and I know that I set up some graphics for our graphics team. There are some controllers that make that easier. I mean, I over the years have learned all the keystrokes on Nomad, so I can kind of sit there on a laptop and just run. But the program, ETC EOS programming wing, has encoders and is a really, really wonderful way to work. The problem is, it is a USB device that is not sending keyboard strokes, so you can't get it across Parsec. So, I send out to our amazing community here the request to think about how we might connect that USB device to that other computer far away, because I would love to have that kind of control. There's another device called the command keys, and the command keys is a keyboard, and it's sort of like the X keys. Some of you know what the X keys are, and it'll just send key commands, and that way I have a button for everything that the lighting console would have, and I can move much faster there and not have to think of keystrokes. So it all, and we're going to get deeper into this, and I don't want to just sit here and blab on. So
no, but it's been fascinating to hear the background, and I understand we're actually going to do some practical demonstrations of how this works. You're going to be controlling some lights remotely from where you are.
Correct. And I think the point that I wanted to make in all of this is to say that there are these different levels of control, and there are these different ergonomic sort of ways in which we control. That's why, a $150,000 lighting console is so great to have, because you can grab an encoder, you can push on the buttons light up. There's all of these, or you have motorized faders. I mean, there's all these ergonomic things that make it much easier to work with. However, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I have needed to not be at a location because I had some stuff happen in my family. So I was programming a show, Mamma Mia, in Maryland from New Mexico. And so, it's just because we have been doing this, it has opened up the possibility to solve problems that would have been there pandemic or not. So pretty interesting stuff.
It's fascinating stuff, and this is the way the world is going. This must help in terms of collaboration and teamwork as well. You can work with who you want, no matter where they're located, or if they're in a circumstance where they're not in a desk at the building where you're working.
Yeah. And so I'd love for us to kind of go through some of the things. We have a theater in California that we've put together a bunch of moving lights and sort of set up a system which we're iterating through and figuring out where the tough points are and figuring out what can be better. But for a band to come in and we can have some really interesting looks come out of there. And I can control it and deal with it and work with it. I am using the ETC workflow. There are other workflows like the Grand MA and the a variety of other ones, but because I use ETC often and I've gotten it to work on the remote world, this is what we're using. And I literally sent my key, my ETC key over there, and they have that running over there, and so they can output the DMX that they need to for those. It's only got 2 universes on it, so it's a 2-universe system. So we have a number of cameras here, and hopefully we can kind of show in conjunction what we're looking at in the space in reality and what we're looking at on the console. So we'll jump through. So we have like a front-on camera. We have a witness camera, what we call a witness camera, which looks at the space from the side and kind of also shows some of the lights so that I can kind of see what's actually happening in the space. And then we tend to run a lot of haze so that we can see the architecture of the lights in space. So let me do a few things just to show you kind of how I can move this from a remote setting.
This is cool. We've got a 4-up, so we're seeing a variety of things. That's very nice.
All right, so I just started the hazer so that we can see some more haze in the air. If I simply just grab all of the elation lights and I turn on the moving light control, then I can grab all these lights and I can move them.
And where are you again versus where this theater is? The theater's in California.
Yeah, the theater's in California, and I'm in Maryland.
And you're in Maryland. And what are you controlling them from? Are you on an iPad or a computer? Or?
I'm on a PC, on a laptop.
PC on a laptop. Excellent.
Yeah, through Parsec.
Got it.
And so I have these moving light controls, and I can individually do different things to the lights. Whether I'm changing the gobos, or I'm adding a prism effect. I can just individually grab each parameter and make it do things. And then I can record those into presets, and then I can kind of jump around. Like when I'm doing a band, I'll busk through the different presets and make different things happen, right? So, and because things move very quickly, many of these presets, as you can tell and hear in the console, are not labeled. They're numbered. I just go like, I've been doing this for so long that I just start to put numbers in my head and remember them, and I call those things up without thinking about it. I should change that. I should label them.
Well, we were talking earlier about run a show, and it's easier to have, Q15 or something like that than take these lights and do this with them, right? Is that right?
So, and that's a really good point, Bill. You want to try to group things in ways that work for your brain. If there was another lighting designer or even any trainees that I trained to come in and work with this, they may have a different way of thinking about it, and they may want to organize it in a different way. One of the other things that we are going to try to do, that we are trying to do, is putting a 3-dimensional version of the space into the lighting console. And this will allow us to see not just what's on the camera, but what is in 3-dimensional space. So I will tell you that what we're going to be looking at here, the locations of the lights are not perfect yet. We're working on that. But let's see. Let me get to the. All right. So I can literally grab where lights are pointed and drag them around in 3-dimensional space.
Boy, that's got to be really useful for the local crew who has, who needs to physically hang these instruments and or move them.
Well, wag the dog, right? I mean, what happens first is that they need to be hung.
If you don't have a light, it's hard to control it.
Yeah. So first we need to tell them by making a light plot, which I did, where they should go, how they should be controlled, what their channel numbers are, and then that all gets done. And then we have to sort of build this out as it's built, right? Do an as-built of this, which is the part that is still in process. We have to figure out each detailed distance from center that each one of these lights are, so that when I do grab these lights to focus them, that they're going to the right place. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
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 I, of course, had this all set up nicely before, and now I feel like it's not doing anything I wanted to do because you guys are here.
Of course, Murphy's Law affects Zoom calls as well as it does everything else. One thing, I'm sure that as we get into questions and here in the middle, I'm just fascinated with your live demo, but also talk about latency and things like that. Is this world now fast enough for somebody to actually work real time in doing a show?
It's a really excellent question. So one of the things that we've learned through the Todd Reynolds project and through many of the little, Belfast method and various things that we've been practicing and learning here on the Office Hours group is that, yes, it is not immediate. So how do we start to deal with those latency issues? And we're thinking through this stuff, right? So maybe I get to know the song really well, and I figure out what the latency is and try to anticipate a change to the hit of the music rather than to what I'm hearing. Like, don't be late. And it's difficult, right? And so one of the things that Alex and I have talked about is maybe trying to pull together something in Isadora that is then also talking to this console that would listen to what's happening in the music and make choices so that we can line up that latency and have that all happen locally. These are the sorts of things that we're thinking about at Todd Reynolds, like where Todd is sending a delayed version of himself to Detroit. And so we're lining up what Isadora is doing with the music by delaying everything before it goes out, right? So these are the sorts of things that we have to think through, and it's tricky.
That's fascinating to me because I'm thinking of jazz musicians who play with time a good little bit, and a great phrasing jazz musician or singer will sometimes advance ahead of the beat, sometimes lag behind the beat. So it'd be interesting if lighting directors and lighting technicians have to become more like that and build in that mental delay. It's fascinating.
Well, and I think that, the people that are the saints of the business are the TDs or the callers, the stage managers in theater, the TDs in live production, right? That
Amen.
Learn that delay, get it into their bones, and then make that happen so that we who watch it, or I guess we make it too, but those of us when we are watching it can feel like there is no disconnect. It is all locked up in time. And so one of the things that the pandemic did for me is it made me think about time in a way that I've never thought about it before. And it made me realize that the magic of live performance, of in-person together performance is essentially limited by the speed of sound. And so if we can get to a point where we're close and closer to that, the more these kinds of events are going to feel live. And they are live, but I think you understand what I'm saying. It's a little bit of a nuance. Yeah,
absolutely. And we've been talking about it a good little bit. We have got questions starting to stack up, so we probably should toss a couple of questions in, and then as they bring up more issues, you can talk more and give us more examples of how things work. So, Courtney,
Absolutely.
do you want to dive into our first one?
All right, from John Foltz in Sellingsgrove, Pennsylvania, he says, our studio has analog dimmers and a simple DMX console. We added a few new LEDs that need always-on power. Can I set any of the older dimmers to bypass the DMX and send constant power to the LEDs?
Is that something you've dealt with, Tláloc?
It is. It's a problem that I've dealt with a few times. And depending on the type of dimmers that you have, you can get different modules that drop in that are literally on and off. They bypass any dimming. And that's really what you want to do for the electronics of those LED units. You don't want to send them switched power, because what's happening with dimmers is that they are, although yours are analog, so you may be in a little bit better shape there just to keep them at full all the time. But the best case scenario is to have that not be a dimmed source of power. And what I've actually done is either found the module that is a direct pass through that you can put into that space and use that same circuitry. Because the whole point here, guys and gals, is that we want to not have to run a whole new circuit and run a whole new conduit. We want to be able to use what's already been paid for in order to send the hot power to those units, which is different than 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we wanted to dim everything, and now we need hot power so that this is a thing that comes up. And I've also literally gone into the modules and bypassed the dimming portion of that module with a new cable and crossed it over and just kept it there protected with the breaker. So there's a couple of different ways that you can go about this, but very good question. And please be sure not just to assume you can put that on dimmed power at full, because you may have a shorter life for your equipment.
Thanks, John Foltz, for the question. Next one, Courtney.
Coming in from Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, British Columbia, he says, new to DMX, can we use XLR audio cables for DMX? And if not, how do you tell them apart and keep them from getting mixed together?
Okay, we're going to toss this one to Tláloc as well.
The truth of the matter is they are going to be mixed together. And because the only real difference, it's not a pinout difference, it is an impedance difference. DMX wants a higher impedance of 110 ohms, and XLR is a lower impedance of 75 ohms. And so, or did I say that backwards? But those are the real numbers, I promise. And so you want to be careful. So both will work, but true DMX cable will work better, especially when you have a lot of units or a lot of distance.
Fair enough. Great answer. Let's move on to the next question.
I was just going to ask him before we get into the next one. Does it require a twisted pair in the cable, or does straight cables work better for DMX? And that makes a difference in the impedance as well. Do you know?
I believe it. I don't know. I think that it wants twisted pair, because what DMX does is it sends the signal twice, and it compares the two signals and checks for any additional or change of noise that's coming through it in order to drop that out programmatically in the chip to essentially deal with any kind of interference from electromagnetic interference.
So it does a version of balanced audio, kind of. It looks at two things and gets what's different about the two.
Yep.
And does ringing cancellation, I guess, for different impedances,
All right.
And I highly recommend, there's ETC University has a DMX certification that you can go take, and it was free during the pandemic. I don't believe it's still free, but you can learn a lot about how that works. And it despite the fact that I've been using it for 20 years, I learned a lot.
And don't you love a field where no matter how much you've learned, there's always more to learn? Next question, Courtney.
Okay, this one comes in from John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. He says, does anyone have experience using remote control of a software-only DMX, such as LightKey? I see that they have some Ableton integration.
Tláloc, take it away.
I did want to answer this question as well. I don't have experience with LightKey, but I do have experience with software-only systems, which in fact I'm using right now. Even though they do have, ETC has hardware solutions, they also have software only solutions, with one exception. You need a way to get the signal to your units, and whether that be a NIC card, and because some lights are starting to be IT compatible, so you can literally give them an IP address and send them ArtNet or SACN. But most lights in this day and age are still wanting DMX. So what you do is you send ArtNet or SACN to a device via either USB or Ethernet, and then you change it over to DMX and connect that up to the lights. So the only exception there is that you need some little hardware, whether it be a NIC card or some other way, depending on your lights. And there are some good integrations with all of these softwares that you can make a lot of things happen. So particularly because many of them have OSC and many of them have MIDI. So if you can connect those any of those requirements that you're trying to make happen to MIDI or OSC, then you essentially open a whole world of control up.
Tláloc, obviously you work at the top end of professional theater and things like that. Is it like music in that there are now tiers? Is there inexpensive equipment coming in that's maybe partially but not entirely compatible with these protocols? And is there, it seems like there's, kind of like prosumer and consumer and then professional in some of the old video audio things in show control and things like that. Are there tiers like that, or is everything following the same pattern?
There are tiers. However, the USITT protocols are sort of standardizations like SMPTE, like for the protocol of SACN, for ArtNet, and for DMX. Some people who just get into it are like, why is this so antiquated? Well, because there was a standard and we're sticking to it, and we're trying to make sure that we can still use lights that we bought 20 years ago.
Perfect sense.
And so that's kind of what it is. But slowly there's pressure on the system to get those standards to be a little bit more modernized, and that's happening in bit by bit. But in terms of your question about the tiers, absolutely right. I mean, there's the type of gear that maybe a new band could purchase. They bought 6 or 7 lights, and they needed to have some interest for their show, but they don't want to spend $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $15,000 a light.
Sure,
there's something there, because if you think about what these things cost, if you have 25 lights and they're $15,000 a piece, it starts to add up pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's when you need the foundation of Bob and Carol Supporting the theater. Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. Well, that's interesting. I expected that there was going to be these tiers. And, we've got also things happening in the automation space. I know this is a wholly different pond, but in HomeKit and the rest of that kind of control of simple household lighting, you just wonder whether some things from those simple things will percolate and cross-pollinate with the complex world of the professionals. It has in other spaces. Be interesting to see if that happens.
They absolutely do, because the truth of the matter is, even in the largest of theaters, there may be a show that they don't want to spend as much money on, and so there's a budget. And so me as a designer, I say, well, how can I do XYZ with with this paradigm and with these restraints? And maybe it's grabbing this particular thing that is a home kit kind of thing and integrating it somehow into the DMX system. So I always run in, Bill, to these kinds of problems. Like, okay, I want to do a thing, but they don't want to spend money for the thing, but they'd be happy if I figure out how to do it without spending a lot of money. So I sit in that world all the time.
Absolutely. And theater, one of the things that's the most charming about theater is there's this experimental, edgy, let's try to do this with nothing because it's an idea that everybody's behind. And so that idea of the small, low budget thing coming up with something brilliant is, I think, something that the theater world has always embraced robustly. Let's see what we can do with what we got.
It's the old Mickey Rooney movie. Hey, I've got a barn. We could put on a show.
Yes, but in the technology space that we work in, I mean, we're at this level, but there are a lot of people doing, they got nothing but an iPhone, and they managed to put out good content using nothing but that. God bless them. All right, let's move on to the next question.
Okay, this one comes in from Brandon Buttram in Indianapolis, Indiana. He says, Tláloc, what's the most challenging part about remote lighting control and design? I am thinking there's a lot of ways for it to go wrong.
Yeah, there are a few ways for it to go wrong. One thing that happened to me this past week is that I lost my eyes, and my being able to see is vital, and so all of my input into a Zoom call that I was seeing Mamma Mia through went black. And so I called up people on the ground here and I said, throw an iPhone in the Zoom call right now. And I did that night through an iPhone, which was problematic because iPhones, what they do is they have way too much auto exposure. I need something to sit at an exposure so that I can see whether or not something is too bright or too dim. I'm not blowing anything out, or if I am blowing it out, I know it, and so I just had to constantly think, well, this is not really what it looks like. And then I would look at these things, ask these questions, and then ask somebody on site to see what was really actually happening.
It's great about live performance. You get those moments where every bit of adrenaline just dumps into your system. It's failing. What can we do? Paddle faster. Awesome. Yeah. Courtney had a thought about that.
Yeah, I wondered, you showed us that 3D representation of your lighting setup. Is it possible that you could, if you lose a video image back from the location, does it send acknowledgments back when you say, move this light to point B? Does that light acknowledge back over the DMX that could be fed into that 3D image to show you that, yes, that light has moved to its designated location and color, et cetera?
So, Courtney, there are a couple of things to talk about when it comes to that. Lights have a protocol called RDM that tells the lighting console whether or not there's a lamp out or there's an overheat situation or something like that. They don't really send information back about where they really are. I also feel that it is the devil because RDM has not been adopted as widely as DMX has, and so the handshake that gets sent back to some of the cheaper units, as Bill was talking about on those tiers, will be seen as dirty DMX by those lights, and they will flicker. So I tend to, in some situations, turn that off. That being said, your question is still valid because that's kind of the reason. switch over to the lighting console again, that's kind of the reason that we put these lights. We try to put these lights into the three-dimensional world, because if they're in the right place, we can see what they're doing. And if it's a dance concert or a lighting concert that is essentially trying to make shape and emotion out of space and time, then I can see what's happening in a really good way if I'm doing busking and kind of working live, and I won't be out even if I can't see. But it's really nerve-wracking.
Absolutely. Next question, please.
Okay, coming in from Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany. What brand or technology do you recommend for remote control lights for semi-professional use in a home studio, not far distant? Are there technologies on which different brands of lights work together?
Yeah.
Tláloc, any thoughts?
So DMX is the whole point. That's the whole point of DMX, is to be able to use 17 different kinds of lights from different manufacturers and still use the same protocol to talk to them. So as one of the questioners asked before, there's, what do they call it? Light something. There's all these different inexpensive ways and some free ways to control lights via that standardized DMX protocol. And so even you don't have to go so far as to get an ETC console or a Grand MA console, which can start to get expensive. You can get these software only versions and work out and do the kind of control that you really need, and you won't have to work. And then you were like, well, I don't know, my house would be better with moving lights. Then you start to move up and get those better control softwares.
Can I deduct the cost of a disco ball? Just thinking to myself. Anyway, moving on. Douglas, next question.
All right, from Douglas Carmichael. He says, ETC themselves says that ETC does not officially support nor troubleshoot VPN implementation. Do you think the console vendors will eventually support remote operation as a normal workflow?
That's interesting. And virtual private network to give you security. Does that cause a problem for some of this stuff, Tláloc?
Yeah, so definitely 3 cheers for Douglas's question, because this is the world in which these companies, I think, need to notice the future. We need a way to work over the WAN, and I will say that wholeheartedly. What we're doing right now is Parsec, and Parsec works very hard on security, and so we're not using a VPN in this particular instance. And we find that trying to use a VPN, because let me back up for a second. ETC has a system where if you have 3 consoles that are licensed consoles, they can hook together in a variety of different ways, and you can control a whole rig from different parts of the building or different parts of the campus, and they're all connected. They're interconnected. They're working together. They work as backups. They work as clients, and it's really, really robust, and it works really well. What I'm hoping to see in the future is a way to do that across networks, to do that across the internet, right? So that if I have a console here, or I have the programming wing, I can connect up, and then I can have all those ergonomic benefits and have an easier time building a show. So 3 cheers for your question, Douglas.
Nice. Okay. Well, let's try another one. See if we can get as lucky.
Okay, another one from Douglas Carmichael. He says, for shows that are tightly synchronized with music, would there be any issues with latency working remotely?
We discussed that earlier, but
absolutely. And we're thinking through some of that stuff daily and trying to get behind it, and in front of it would be the right way to put that. Yeah, working on it.
Courtney, you had a thought?
Yeah, I had a question. if the band locally is working to a click track or a SMPTE timecode based track, let's say in the middle of it, they go to video playback that has elements that are playing back that are in sync with the music that the band is playing. They have to maintain synchronization somehow. Does the DMX console tie into a SMPTE track so it can follow along? And do you do that? Can you do that remotely, or do you have to have the console local and have that SMPTE track fed in locally so that there's not a latency issue and you just trigger it to go?
Yes. So the answer is yes, you can lock it into timecode. There are some limitations, like the console we're using in California right now is the base model. So it doesn't have the connection points for the SMPTE, but it's totally possible to do this. And with a slightly larger input point, with a bigger console to just lock it in. And you would want to do it locally. You would want that SMPTE to be generated there, and then for it to lock into the video, lock into the click track, and lock into the lighting. So absolutely.
That would make a lot of sense for things that have a tempo, but do you run into circumstances, Tláloc, where there's a composer or a performer who demands the ability to slide tempo or conduct as they feel it should fit in time, and it's not against some regular pulse that you could depend on?
Yeah, opera.
Okay, that's the all right.
Yeah, and so what we do with that is, and really, I think stage managers in opera are super important. And what we try to do with that is get them a low latency monitor of the conductor, so that they can see the cues and call lighting on those cues. And that same with musical theater. Actually, maybe more so with musical theater, because in musical theater you might have a button, whereas in opera sometimes you have a button. But in almost every time in musical theater, there's a button somewhere. And what does a button mean? A button is a hit of lights that changes quickly. If we throw up some of the lights in Cali, I can try and show you what that means. So, if I'm jumping through cues fast, if that happens on the beat of a music, we want that to happen in time. And so if the conductor is going to cue that beat of that music, that end of that music at any given point, we want the stage manager to be able to see that and take it on his hand being up, or however long it takes for all the things to happen. Because the truth of the matter is there's usually an operator, and the operator may have latency, a different kind of latency, but they may have latency. And so the stage manager, who are saints in my opinion, have to take into consideration that particular operator's latency and back up the call that much.
Fascinating. We're getting a window into how complex these things can be as we move from an old era where everybody was surrounding the stage in physical presence and could visually or auditorially hear things perfectly. And now everything is different. So this is exciting. Let's move on to the next question, Courtney.
Okay, another one from Douglas Carmichael. He says, could you see event promoters or theatrical producers adopting remote lighting operation as a mainstream to save costs?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have my hand raised, but I think that what ends up being kind of exciting, and I don't know where it's going to go because this is a brand new kind of thought process, right? Is can we have lighting designers that don't have to fly to be there, and then have a bunch of operators locally? Because I think we don't really want to take away the labor from the operator union, from IATSE in the theaters. There's no reason to do that. But could there be a savings for these producing companies to not have to fly in blokes like me to do things? And I think that there's a weighing of the process. There's something about working directly with a director next to you where you can hear that intake of breath when you realize you've done a cue incorrectly, and they didn't have it on mute because they're right next to you, and you need to know that. You need to be able to sort of anticipate that and make them feel like you are working with their needs, even though they may not want to say it.
I think that was incredibly well put. And I think everybody who's worked in this industry, any corner of it, knows that moment. You know,
Plus, you still have to have local people to hang all the lights and get power to all the lights. And, you know, so you're not going to save any money there. The only thing you're going to save is transportation of the console operator, really, and maybe the lighting director if you're not going to come out.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter is that in normal theatrical situations, I don't often operate the console. I have to know how to operate it really well because there are a variety of levels of knowledge that people have about the console. So I speak in what is it called, in syntax? You know, I literally say it's this button, this button, this button, this button, enter. You know, that kind of thing. And so, what may happen down the road is with this project is, you know, maybe we get some operators that want to learn the console, and I call the syntax to them remotely. And that way people can learn this console. So there's a couple of different ways that there's just different workflows. This is the case with all of this stuff.
Well, and a lot of this was, you know, this remote operation was born and accelerated from the pandemic, and it really taught us that, you know, before there wasn't a way to do all these things completely remotely. Suddenly there was a need. You know, the show does not go on unless you can get people from various homes and locations to collaborate on putting a piece of art together and out to an audience. And now suddenly we know it's possible. I just can't see it going back to where people won't use these tools and leverage talent wherever it is to bring it in on projects wherever that's appropriate. Courtney, did you have another thought?
Yeah, it's related. A question. I'd type it in, but I'm too lazy. On traveling shows, let's say a band's got, 21 one-night stands in different cities. Do they pre-rig the lighting trusses with specific instruments already attached to the trusses, and then they just load them into cases and put them on the truck and move them to the next location? Then you just plug in the master tails to those and the controller so that the setup is the same in every city, so that you don't have to hang each light separately and relabel and readdress each individual light, so that it makes the setup a lot faster and a lot easier? Or do you have to actually position each one of those lights according to a diagram every time they break down and set up that whole lighting rig in each city?
The answer is yes. And so when you have a large enough budget and a large enough truck, enough trucks, if you have a multi-truck show, then you can keep all of those truss sections built. And then they just get connected up, hung, and then they're already going to have the right coordinates in the space, or at least as close as possible in the space. And then you can go in and change your presets that ever so slightly, an inch down or an inch up, and then it'll fix the whole show. And that's sort of the idea behind it. You want to do as much of that as possible. And many of these tours don't use any local equipment. They use rental equipment or their own equipment from a tour preset or a tour setup. And so they build all that out. And just like you say, it's plug and play Legos that go together. And then it's got to be fast. It's got to go together really fast. So your big tours, like, I think a good example would probably be some of the big U2 tours. That's kind of how they're going to work. They're going to be built and they're going to lock in and just connect up. Doesn't mean it's not a lot of work, even though they're Lego-like, that they go together, because there's, probably 500 universes of control, maybe 2,000 lights, so.
Well, yeah, and stages are all different. If you have an 80-foot wide stage and then you move into a 160-foot wide stage, you probably need to adapt depending on where the musicians set up or the performers are. And I can see all those things. Let's move on to the next question.
This one comes in from Dennis Champion Walker in Mansfield, UK. Says, would the remote lighting operator listening to the audio via FarPlay help address the latency problem?
Yeah, we had that exciting program on FarPlay, and it was really interesting to see friends of the show performing in 2 different locations and managing latency successfully. Tláloc, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the number of how do I put this? The number of miles between you and the venue would matter in that case. If you're trying to use this as a low latency response to the music, then you'd have to check what that latency is. And so, we're using Zoom for the sound in this case. And so Zoom is usually around 300 milliseconds. So you have to know those things. But then again, what is the latency in a giant auditorium of the lighting busker at 400 feet in the back of the house? So,
and for those of you who are watching the show, I really would recommend you go back. There was a Far Play, and Dan Tepfer was here on the show, and he and Todd Reynolds did live music together. It was a fascinating show. If you're interested in pushing latency as low as possible in the musician performance space, I'd go back and review that. If you things are moving, things are changing out there.
Do you think I could interrupt?
Sure.
And right before I know we have a bunch more questions, and so I want to just quickly talk a little bit about parameters of a light. And
absolutely,
because we have all this gear, let's use it. So if I took channel 8 and I made it full and rem dimmed it, so now we have a single light, and you can see it, yeah. Yes, we have the haze on.
Window
now
2.
I can change its tilt. I can change its pan, which is how sort of the focus positioning works. It's just on a pan tilt, like a camera sort of idea.
And I just want to reemphasize that second window is real time in a different location from you. This is no recorded playback. This is live. You're controlling it from where you are, and that light is in a studio in San Francisco Bay Area somewhere being controlled.
Yep. And then we can change the color, right? And every time I click on these little houses, that brings us back to our normal, our state. And then so in these robotic lights, there's different stepper motors that change the way in which things are running in the optical train. So the thing I just showed you with color, those are flags of dichroic filters, and they change what light is coming out of it. Or because the reason I know that they're flags of dichroic filters is because it's cyan, magenta, and yellow, and not red, blue, and green, right? So that means it's subtractive mixing and not additive mixing. Then there's also a wheel full of other dichroic filters that I can literally run in front of the light, which is a different way to mix color in there. You can do hue and saturation. You can also add a CTO, so it's a little bit more lighter of a filter.
Those, excuse me for interrupting. Do those use physical filters, or in an LED light, do they just change the mix of RGB LED sources?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to explain before, is that because of the way that this shows up as cyan, magenta, and yellow, I know that this is a subtractive mix. So that means it's using physical filters in front of a white LED engine. However, other lights would be RGBA or RGBW, and so that would be additive mixing of LED light. So it just depends on the unit. Right.
And are these keyed back to the classic Lee and Roscoe type filters? Is if you're used to that world, do they have analog?
So I could say 8 at 580, which means 8 at Roscoe 80, and there it goes.
Nice. They're keeping people who have spent a life in the theater and who've been in the lighting industry and who understand this as their native language almost.
Yeah, and I mean, me being one of those people. So I use that all the time. So let's get back to this. I know we have questions, so I don't want to take up the producer's time here. But then I can add gobos, and you can see there in the geometry of a light that we see those lines, and that's because there's now a physical gobo in the optical train. I can change the focus, the size of that, and the focus of it, as you can see, right? I can make those hard edges of that gobo. I can also, I can literally put shutters in and cut the light into a shape. I mean, it's really powerful what you can do with moving lights. And then you can also use a prism, which essentially takes and repeats the light a number of times, which means that the largest you can use the light, you can kind of expand that. So we'll leave it at that. Maybe that generated a few more questions, but we can get back into the questions.
No, I think it's fascinating. And, Tláloc, this is the area that generally lighting designers would have worked in as opposed to lighting operators. This is done beforehand in most cases, and the lighting plots and the nature of it. Am I correct in that, or is it all melted together now?
Deciding what the unit is and what those parameters will have in order to make the show that you're trying to make as a designer is the purview of the designer. Then getting it hung is the purview of the technicians. Then programming that show, whether it be a piece of theater where you're programming it ahead, or programming all the buttons that you want to use to busk a piece of music, is the purview of the designer. And oftentimes in music, it mixes together where the operator and the designer kind of come together. Whereas in theater and in some musical events, you're actually just using your voice to ask an operator to do certain things, right? Because there's different groups of people that need to be doing different groups of things in the union. And so that's how that works.
Thank you for the explanation. Hopefully there's some young people who might be watching this or come to it later who are interested in careers in this, and I wanted to give them an idea that there are multiple people that touch this at multiple levels along the way. It's not just one person does everything for this show and that's it. End of story.
Yeah, there's a lot of paperwork involved. If you have a large plot, if you have 500 lights, you want to know everything about that light, what channel it is, what address it is, where it is in space, what color it needs, what kind of power it needs to get. And so there's we'll be teaching class later today about how that works. So
excellent.
It gets complicated.
Remind me to make sure that we can send everybody there. I want to deal with questions.
It's a class here at my school, but anyway.
It's a class at yeah. Darn. Is there a camera in the back of the room because you'll get a lot of hits today, I would guess. Anyway, let's move on. Next question.
Coming in from Rupert McRae right here on the panel and in Dallas, Texas. He says, how important is color accuracy in your witness camera pipeline?
Oh, so important. And there's two ways to think about it, Rupert. One is if I'm lighting for the eyeball, if I'm lighting for people to go sit in the room and watch it, then it has to be color corrected in the way that is closest to what people are actually seeing. And then if I'm lighting for the cameras that I'm using as my witness, then I'm going to light for those cameras. Depends on sort of like that whole question of digital first or not. And so, so like, for example, the color standard that's happening in this project is for video. So I'm going to light to that.
Okay, perfect. Sorry.
You have to make sure you turn off auto color correction on that camera if it has automatic color correction.
Yeah.
And you caused me to think back. You said that, you were in that circumstance where you lost power to everything and you only had an iPhone. You had to throw it up quickly. I guess there's probably some sense in thinking in rigs in the future about having something behind you as an, oh my gosh, everything else has failed. And there might be, and the ability to lock iris and lock color balance and the rest of that would be really useful in that.
Absolutely.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move on. Next question.
This one comes in from John Foltz in Sellingsgrove, Pennsylvania. He says, if the DMX cable runs are too long and you get dirty DMX, how do you fix that?
You you want to try in all runs of DMX, if possible, to have a terminator. All of a sudden the word left me. A terminator at the last light. And the way that works is essentially it is a resistor. Yeah, it's a load resistor that pulls the voltage back up to try to get so you're not dropping too much voltage across the board there. So
okay, we have 4 more questions, and we have 3 minutes to get through them, so we could keep the pace up here. Next question. I'm sorry.
Ronnie Hofsoy in Tromsø, Norway says, what is the reason for deciding to use Parsec Remote instead of sending ArtNet or SACN directly from the lighting board using something like, and he puts a link to something from Streamweaver Lite?
Ronnie, I absolutely love Streamweaver. And so there are moments when that is exactly what I would do. There is, it is very chatty. DMX is sending ArtNet or SACN is sending 512 addresses and intensity levels over and over and over and over again per universe. And so it gets really, really chatty. And so there's a lot of potential for problems in that workflow. But there are times when that's exactly what you want. You want to be able to have a central location and send a bunch of ArtNet over to 10 different actors' homes so that, let's think about if we see the panel that we have on right now, we essentially were able to make all of you red at the same time in order to make some sort of storytelling event happen. Red is probably a bad idea because it's not good for video. But my point being, do a thing in each of your rooms. Bill has some beautiful ways to highlight things in his back and behind him. Let's say that I, as a lighting designer for office hours, could control what is being highlighted behind Bill at any point. That's when to use Streamweaver, in my opinion.
Cool. We got 3 questions. We've got about a minute left. Let's see how far we can get. And the next one's really about far play. I'm not sure we want to dive into that too far. So,
well, we'll just run through it. I think we've already answered this, but Dave Troutman from Edmonton, I guess it's Canada or maybe California. This all sounds like something which would make use of far play, solving some of the latency issues. Yeah,
it would work well. It's Canada, and I would love to try it. Let's figure out a way to give it a shot.
Okay, next question.
Michael Smith in Silverado says, in a stage play or concert scenario, can you pre-program in advance to automate the entire show or per song?
Yes. So in places like the Disney experience, all of that is pre-programmed per a time code. And so everything happens on a click track and everything happens pre-programmed. The next level down is you record cues, and then the stage manager can call those cues at any particular time in order to adjust for different timing points in the show.
And the last question
comes in from Ernest Floyd in Bastrop, Louisiana. What software do you recommend to start learning light control?
Download ETC Nomad, start playing with it, and start taking some of their tutorials. It's free to use. The only thing that you need to spend money on is to output to actual lights. But once you start using it, you can start to understand what lighting control is all about.
Super cool. Great hour. Thank you one and all for this. We're at the top of the hour now. Tláloc, this was fascinating to me, and I'm sure to everybody who watched this. So great job of helping everybody get their minds around this whole new world that we're heading into. That takes us to the end of the show. Hopefully, put questions in for Tláloc. I'm sure we may be able to get him back for another one of these if we ask really nicely and if his schedule frees up. Thank you, sir. We will see you all tomorrow on Office Hours, same time, same process. I think it's time to roll credits and say, take care of yourselves.
Happy trails.
Brilliant job, Tláloc. I really enjoyed that.
That was a lot of fun.
I think a lot of people who came here for that information have to be going away really satisfied. I know I learned a ton, and I'm sure other people did too.
And Tláloc shows up in after hours every now and then. You could hit him up for questions there. Yeah,
plus all the practical things worked really, really well. I mean, I I know you'd spent a lot of time and effort, you and the team, putting all that together, but boy, it seemed to work flawlessly.
3 cheers for JJ.
JJ. Oh yeah, we should have mentioned him. Well, we're mentioning him now. Hopefully the audio is still on. Yeah, JJ. I know JJ.
He's the glue that holds this whole group together.
He really is. He works his